On the evening of February 1st, 2009, a 32-year-old man named Luo Jinfa stood in the doorway of his apartment in Taiwan, waiting for his landlord to finish lecturing him about being late on his rent. Luo had just moved into this apartment 2 months earlier in December. And finally, after about 5 minutes of the landlord just ranting, Luo said, "Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but I actually need to ask you something. Do you know if anyone's been murdered inside of my apartment?" And the landlord said, "You know what? I know what's wrong with you, but I'll be back in a month and you better have your rent." 1 month later, Luo's landlord had still not received rent from Luo, and so the landlord went to Luo's apartment and knocked on the door. Eventually, when Luo didn't come to the door, the landlord just used his own key to let himself in. But when he stepped in there, even the landlord was shocked at what he saw. I mean, the apartment was in total disarray. Furniture was all over the place. There was a freezer that Luo had moved to the middle of the living room floor. But the thing that really creeped the landlord out the second he walked in there was that all over the walls were these yellow and red pieces of paper with prayers written on them that had been stabbed into the wall with individual knives all over the apartment. And in fact, Luo would not come back. The landlord never had to worry about telling Luo to stay away. He just never came back. Fast forward 7 months, the landlord's brother approached the landlord and said, "Hey, can I rent out that apartment?" So a couple of days later, the landlord's brother, along with the landlord, met at Luo's apartment. They went inside and they totally cleaned it out. And they drove to a nearby recycling facility where they sold whatever they could and then dumped the rest, and then they left. However, when the workers at the recycling facility began processing some of the junk that had been left behind, they made a discovery that immediately made them stop and contact the police. It would turn out Luo had not actually abandoned his apartment. In fact, he had never left his apartment. So Luo had become totally convinced that his apartment was haunted by a ghost. At night, he would hear walking around above him, and then sometimes he would claim that he would see these shadowy figures wandering around inside of his apartment. And so he began to wonder if, maybe somebody had been murdered in his apartment and their ghost was now haunting him. Hence the question to his landlord. And it was driving him absolutely mad. But Luo discovered there was actually one place he could go in his apartment that would sort of protect him from whatever was happening inside of there. And that was to lock himself inside of his bedroom. However, his bedroom was not a real room. His bedroom was that big freezer the landlord found sitting in the middle of his living room. Luo had been climbing in there and shutting it to protect himself from this entity at night. However, Luo gotten really drunk, climbed inside of his bedroom, shut the lid, and forgot to prop it open. And so as he lay there, he slowly suffocated to death because there wasn't any circulation. And after he died inside of his freezer, nobody found him.